ancient biblical prophets wrote about the future. Today, theologians are poring over those scriptures with a firm belief that their prophecies are coming to pass. Journey now into the world of eschatology on Prophecy in the News with author and lecturer J.R. Church.
On today's Prophecy in the News, we're going to take a look at Jacob's deathbed prophecies. They are recorded in Genesis chapter 49. Jacob gathered his sons around his bed and then gave prophecies of what would befall each of his 12 sons. On today's program, we're going to talk about Jacob's dozen, his children, and what happened to each one of them according to the prophecy he gave. And it's from this book by William Varner called Jacob's Dozen. Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me Jacob's Dozen.
You know, J.R., there's a lot of prophecy. As a matter of fact, when we read this deathbed prophecy, it contains a phrase that makes my ears perk up. Genesis 49:1 says, Jacob called unto his sons and said, gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. Well, every time I hear that phrase, last days, my ears perk up.
Yes. And of course, these prophecies have implications that go all the way to the end of days, to the end time. And of course, we feel that we have arrived at that special time in world history when the Jews have returned to their promised land, and each of these 12 tribes are surfacing. Well, in our opening statement by Jacob, he targets his firstborn son, Reuben. And this is what he says: Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity, and the excellency of power. Unstable as water. Boy, what a downer after all that build-up, you know. Unstable as water thou shalt not excel, because thou wentest up to thy father's bed, then defiledest thou it. He went up to my couch. He had committed the scarlet sin with Bilhah, concubine of Jacob, and for that he must pay, and his posterity must pay as well.
You know, one of the things we learn in the Bible is that there are great spiritual lessons to be gleaned from the failures of the patriarchs. And J.R., the Bible seems to teach by negative example. Solomon made mistakes, David made mistakes, the patriarchs and their sons made various kinds of mistakes, and those are used as spiritual lessons. But one of the things that fascinates me here is that Reuben apparently was what we would call a rebellious son. Maybe he was in competition with his father in some way that caused him to do what he did. And when we read Scripture in this way, it gives a great deal of prophetic insight, because these themes are worked out all the way to the end of the book.
You know, Reuben, being unstable as water, this means that he just mentally did not quite have it all together. Yeah. He could not, he had no wisdom. He could not determine what the outcome should be and follow through with a logical sequence of events. And this is seen in several places. For example, in Numbers chapter 16, when Korah rebelled against Moses, then Reuben and his tribe was right there on the side of Korah, rebelling against Moses' leadership as well. Amazing, isn't it?
It is, and for him to have taken that position again tells us that he was really against the patriarchs. He more wanted to cut his own way out into the wilderness.
But and you know, he's like a lot of Americans today. They go with the flow. They don't think for themselves.
Unstable as water. Water always flows, you know. You cut the channel, it'll always flow down, take the path of least resistance.
Yes.
And I think that describes Reuben.
Absolutely. In Numbers chapter 32, when they come to the borders of the Promised Land, believe it or not, Reuben says, I think my tribe and I, we'd like to live over here on the east side. Instead of taking the best of the land, here he was the oldest of the group. He chose second best. Not smart.
Not smart. And as a matter of fact, when we read about in Chronicles a little bit later, what it says about Reuben, it says, now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn, but forasmuch as he defiled his father's bed, his birthright was given unto the sons of Joseph, the sons of Israel, and the genealogy is not to be reckoned after the birthright. It tells us right there he lost it. He lost it. In fact, had it not been for Moses, he might have lost it completely. He might have lost his life.
That's right. Moses, in his prophecies, pleaded for Reuben, didn't he?
He did.
He said, let Reuben live and not die, and let not his men be few. And if it had not been for Moses, I guess it's possible that his tribe would have just died away.
Right.
You see, he was the oldest. He should have been the royal tribe. He should have had the birthright. He should have had the inheritance. He could have borne the Messiah, but he was unstable as water. And this early sin of his, this scarlet sin, as when he was but a youth, shall we say, cost him and his posterity throughout time, and I'm sure eternity as well. In Judges chapter 6, we have the song of Deborah and Barak after they have won the war against Sisera. And this is what they say concerning Reuben. For the divisions of Reuben, there were great thoughts of heart. In other words, he couldn't make up his mind. Great thoughts of heart. Why abodest thou among the sheepfolds to hear the bleating of the flocks? For the divisions of Reuben, there were great searchings of heart. Unstable as water, he couldn't make up his mind.
Couldn't do it.
Incredible.
And again, Reuben apparently, if we read this as closely as we're able to, he apparently tried to steal the birthright, even though it was his for the taking. By grace, you might say. But he tried to win it with the strength of his own hands, and he ended up losing it, basically.
By going up to his father's couch
Right.
and lying with Bilhah.
Right.
Incredible. I want you to notice that throughout the history of the Old Testament, Reuben never had anybody, no children, no offspring, who became notable or great among the tribes of Israel. He was just a loser.
He was
All the way
indeed.
around. Well, then we come to the next two sons, and they are together in this. I want you to notice what Jacob says on his deathbed, beginning in verse 5 of Genesis 49. Simeon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come not thou into their secret, unto their assembly. Mine honor, be not thou united. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they digged down a wall. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. This is an awesome prophecy against these two tribes.
It is, and it all stems back to an incident that's recorded in Genesis 34. Dinah, the daughter of Leah, was defiled by Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the country. He saw her, he took her, and he defiled her. And when Simeon and Levi heard about this, they were absolutely beside themselves with rage. Chapter 34 of Genesis describes how they took vengeance, and usually, J.R., we read about vengeance being taken, in the Old Testament, and it is a just and honorable cause. In this case, however, the methods used by Simeon and Levi were so brash and cruel that God said, because of that, you're going to be challenged.
They ended up killing the whole village, didn't they?
They did.
And Jacob decided he better move out. He didn't want to stay in the area. He was afraid the other people around the countryside would get an army together and come and wipe him and his 12 sons out completely. And so it was a terrible, terrible thing that Simeon and Levi did. Levi's became, of course, the priest tribe. And Simeon, whose name means hearing, also has prophetic overtones. And these two boys, because they were so cruel, 40 years later, on his deathbed, Jacob has not forgotten their sin. that amazing?
And because of that, by the way, their land grant, which they should have received, was compromised.
Yes. Neither one of them got any territory of their own. Levi received 48 cities scattered throughout the tribes, but they didn't get any real territory of their own. And Simeon, he got some cities in the south part of the country of Judah. We'll tell you more about this when we come back in just a moment, but neither one of these boys got an inheritance of land. Just as Jacob says, I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. No inheritance for them and their posterity. They got some cities, but they had to depend upon other territory. They both lost it.
But you know, that's not the end of the story, because we find out that in the end, the Lord awards the tribes their due.
And we'll be back in just a moment. On Jacob's deathbed, he gave prophecies concerning each of his sons. And this little book called Jacob's Dozen by William Varner is a prophetic look at the tribes of Israel. And he goes through each of the prophecies and tells us what happened to each of the tribes. It's a fascinating book. And one reason why I point this out to you is that these are some things I did not know. I mean, you know, I thought I knew a lot about the Bible, but boy, when I read a book like this, it thrills me to find something that I did not previously know after all these years. I've studied the Bible since I was 7 years old. You'd think I'd know a little bit about it. But when I find something that I did not previously know, it thrills me. I don't know what it does for you, but to find out that Simeon did not get any inheritance of the land. Yeah, I knew Levi didn't get any land, but to find that Simeon didn't get any land goes right back to this prophecy when Jacob on his deathbed said, I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Gary, read us what Joshua had to say about that.
Yeah, in Joshua 19:1, we have the statement, and the second lot came forth to Simeon, even for the tribe of the children of Simeon, according to their families, and their inheritance was within the inheritance of the children of Judah. And then verse 9 says, out of the portion of the children of Judah was the inheritance of the children of Simeon. For the part of the children of Judah was too much for them, therefore the children of Simeon had their inheritance within the inheritance of them. That's very interesting that Judah, the royal tribe, ended up sort of giving land to Simeon.
Giving some cities, actually. The cities and their suburbs that belonged to Simeon actually belonged to the tribe of Judah. He was left out of the inheritance. And he was left out because Jacob predicted that he would be on his deathbed. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. And of course, he's talking not only about Simeon, but Levi as well. And Levi didn't get any territory, just 48 cities. But, you know, Simeon, actually, during the 40 years in the wilderness, he started out with 59,300 people in his tribes. And at the end of the 40 years, the tribe of Simeon only had 22,200. So they they lost over half of their people in that 40 years. So Simeon was really hurting by then.
And this suggests, of course, that the Lord's blessing had been withdrawn from the tribe, because blessing and progeny and population is always linked together in the Old Testament.
Well, it's that sin of murder.
Yeah.
When he went out to kill all those people, he and Levi, because of that, they lost their inheritance. They did not get any land. And, you know, Simeon's name means hearing. And, of course, he became the prototype, the prophecy of all of Israel who would lose their spiritual hearing. And you may recall when Joseph took Simeon and threw him in an Egyptian prison, sent the other brothers back to fetch Benjamin. And Simeon was not returned to them until they came back to Egypt with their younger brother. And so Simeon became a prophecy of Israel's lack of hearing. And of course, we've done studies on that in the past. It's interesting that Simeon himself became a prophecy of something bad against the rest of the tribes. They lost their spiritual insight. their ability to understand spiritual things because of him.
And the next son in order, given in Genesis 49, is Judah. And by the way, the name Judah comes from the Hebrew word that means praise.
Yes.
And of course, this in itself has great prophetic import.
Jacob on his deathbed said, Judah is a lion's whelp. Well, let's back up to verse 8. Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. There's the meaning of his name. Mm-hmm. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. In other words, he's going to be the leader of the tribes. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. In other words, you're going to sit upon the throne. You're going to produce the kings of Israel. Judah is a lion's whelp from the prey. My son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he couched as a lion, and as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be. And a couple more verses there about him, which we'll probably read here in a few minutes. But Gary, let's get to this first part where he is supposed to be the ruler. Yeah. The scepter shall not depart from Judah.
Yeah. And the scepter, of course, the symbol of royal rule, shall not depart from Judah till Shiloh comes. Shiloh being a fascinating name that goes all the way back to Jacob and is the place name of the house of God, where Jacob chose to set up the tabernacle. But you know, it's fascinating that Shiloh becomes more of a symbol than a name. It really has no meaning per se if you try to examine it and find out what it means. But it does have a kind of a metaphoric or typological meaning. And what it means is everything having to do with Messiah, the Messiah and all of the prophecies concerning Messiah.
Mm-hmm. William Varner writes in his book, Jacob's Dozen, about this. He says, the best interpretation views Shiloh as a personal name of the Messiah. The right of kingship will always be with Judah until the Messiah comes. To him, that is the Messiah, the nations will submit. The Talmud lists Shiloh as one of the names of the Messiah in Sanhedrin 98b. Mm-hmm. The most ancient Jewish commentary on the book of Genesis also adopts this interpretation, Bereshit Rabbah 99. He says, this is the view of the authorized version and of many evangelical commentators. The name Shiloh could easily be related to the word shalom, which is the Hebrew word for peace. Mm-hmm. And this is pointed up in Isaiah 9:6, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders. His name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Peace being Shalom, mm-hmm. Shiloh being the takeoff from that. Again, Micah 5:5, and this man shall be the peace. So this interpretation is preferred above the others. This is what William Varner has to say about Shiloh. Well, you know, there are a number of things here about Judah that he talks about. First, he says Judah is a lion's whelp. And this, Gary, refers to Leo the lion, mm-hmm. the symbol, the zodiac symbol of the tribe of Judah. Mm-hmm. And of course, all through the scriptures, we look at the future Messiah as being the lion of the tribe of Judah. And we see Jesus referred to as this lion in the book of Revelation.
You know, it's fascinating that the ancient zodiac really carried out the idea of scriptural redemption. And Leo the lion with the star Regulus, which is the king star, in his foot lies right next to Virgo the Virgin. And these ideas were given in the 12 tribes, really, originally. And what's fascinating to me is that Leo the lion of the tribe of Judah, is the kingmaker, because out of Judah came the whole line of kings, the house of David, and the lion of the tribe of David, which is the Lord Jesus Christ.
Right. And so the very fact that the lion here is the symbol of Judah points to the coming Messiah, and especially that word Shiloh. But then he says, binding his foal unto the vine and his ass's colt unto the choice vine. And you know, Gary, that reminds me of Jesus' triumphal entry, mm-hmm. predicted right here with these two animals.
That's right.
And then it says he washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. Well, that's a picture of the second coming of Christ in Revelation 19. His vestures dripped in blood.
And you know what's interesting is that this gives his first and second coming too. The first coming is a humble arrival in Jerusalem, riding a donkey. And everybody thinks of that as the triumphal entry. But it's really a humble entry because he was rejected by national Israel.
That's right. So you see the book here, Jacob's Dozen. It's really a fascinating little book to point out all of these things about Jacob's deathbed prophecies in Genesis 49. It just really is a thrilling book to read.
And it points out the gospel of grace, too, because all of these brothers, from Reuben and Simeon, Levi, Judah, had imperfections. They had personal problems. They were rebellious. They took vengeance beyond what they should have. They made big mistakes, and yet out of all of these errors, the God of grace will, in the end of days, bring forth justice, will finally give that land grant the way it should have been given centuries ago. It'll be given in the last days, the days of the kingdom.
You know, the four boys that we have talked about on today's program were all sons of Leah, and they all committed scarlet sins. I mean, they really did some pretty bad things, including Judah. And the interesting thing about this is that Leah was pushed off on Jacob by hook and by crook.
That's right.
And boy, her boys paid the price too. Well, it's a fascinating study. On our next program, we're going to take a few more of these. We may not cover the entire book, but I think you're going to really enjoy our next program. We'll be back in just a moment.